What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected directors sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to face an ambush that exposes the toxic underbelly of daytime television? Ron Howard, the man behind cinematic masterpieces like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Rush, thought he was appearing on The View to discuss his latest project. Instead, he found himself trapped in a verbal cage match with Joy Behar, whose relentless attacks and twisted logic would push even the most patient filmmaker to his breaking point. This is the story of how a beloved director's composure cracked live on national television, and why millions of viewers witnessed one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about media ambush interviews. The green room at ABC Studios buzzed with the usual pre-show energy. Ron Howard adjusted his tie, glancing over the talking points his publicist had prepared. The interview was supposed to focus on his upcoming film, a heartwarming drama about small-town America that had already generated Oscar buzz. He'd done hundreds of these interviews over his decades-long career, from his days as Opie Taylor to directing some of Hollywood's biggest hits. The View should have been a cakewalk. "Mr. Howard, we're ready for you," a production assistant called out, clipboard in hand. Ron followed her through the maze of corridors, past framed photos of celebrity guests and memorable moments from the show's long history. He could hear the audience applauding as the hosts took their seats at the familiar semicircular table. Whoopi Goldberg's voice boomed through the speakers as she introduced the segment. "Our next guest needs no introduction. He's been entertaining us for over 50 years. First as an actor, and now as one of the most successful directors in Hollywood. Please welcome Ron Howard." The audience erupted as Ron walked onto the set, his trademark warm smile lighting up his face. He waved to the crowd, shook hands with each host, and settled into the guest chair. The studio lights felt hotter than usual, but he chalked it up to nerves about promoting a film he was particularly passionate about. "Ron, thank you so much for being here," Whoopi began, her tone genuinely welcoming. "I have to say, I've been a fan since the Andy Griffith Show days." "Thank you, Whoopi. Those were magical times, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have grown up in front of America's eyes," Ron replied, his voice carrying that familiar Midwestern sincerity that had endeared him to millions. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, her expression bright and engaged. "Your new film deals with themes of community and resilience. What drew you to this particular story?" Everyone. Ron's eyes lit up as he began discussing his passion project. "You know, Sarah, in today's divided world, I think we've forgotten how much we have in common. This story reminded me of the America I grew up in, where neighbors looked out for each other regardless of their political beliefs or backgrounds. That's when Joy Behar decided to pounce." "That's interesting, Ron," Joy interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that made the other hosts glance her way. "You talk about the America you grew up in like it was some kind of paradise. But wasn't that the same America that was segregated, where women couldn't open bank accounts, and where being anything other than straight, white, and Christian meant you were a second-class citizen?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ron blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. "Well, Joy, I certainly don't want to romanticize the past. Every era has its challenges, and we've made tremendous progress as a society. Progress that people like you fought against every step of the way." Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Let's be honest about what you're really saying. When you talk about the good old days, you're talking about a time when people like you had all the power, and everyone else knew their place." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the friendly chat they'd expected. Ron's publicist, watching from the wings, looked like she was about to have a panic attack. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Ron said, his voice remaining calm but with a hint of confusion. I was simply talking about community spirit and how neighbors used to look out for each other. That doesn't have anything to do with politics or social hierarchies. Joy leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk playing across her lips. Everything is political, Ron. Especially when someone with your platform starts waxing nostalgic about the past. You can't separate art from politics, and you can't separate nostalgia from the reality of who was suffering while you were having your perfect childhood. Sonny Hostin tried to jump in, perhaps sensing the interview was spiraling out of control. Joy, I think Ron is just trying to talk about his film. No, let him answer. Joy snapped, her attention laser-focused on her increasingly uncomfortable guest. I want to know if Ron Howard thinks the civil rights movement was just people complaining about the good old days he's so fond of remembering. Ron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Decades of media training had taught him to stay composed under pressure, but this was unlike anything he'd experienced. The question wasn't just unfair, it was deliberately inflammatory and designed to trap him no matter how he answered. Joy, with all due respect, you're putting words in my mouth that I never said. I've always supported civil rights, women's rights, and equality for all people. My films have consistently promoted themes of inclusion and understanding. Have they, though? Joy pressed, clearly enjoying watching the acclaimed director squirm. Or have they just been feel-good stories that make white audiences feel better about themselves without actually challenging anything? The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with their colleague's attack dog approach. Even Whoopi, known for her own pointed questions, seemed surprised by Joy's relentless assault. Ron took a deep breath, his media training kicking in as he tried to redirect the conversation. I think if you look at my body of work, from A Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, you'll see stories that celebrate human resilience and the power of working together to overcome challenges. These aren't partisan messages, they're human messages. Human messages? Joy repeated with obvious disdain. That's code for not wanting to rock the boat. That's the luxury of privilege, Ron. You get to make movies about how wonderful humanity can be, while real people are fighting for their basic rights. The audience was dead silent now. The earlier warmth completely evaporated. Ron's hands gripped the arms of his chair slightly tighter, the first real sign that his legendary patience was beginning to fray. Ron Howard straightened in his chair, his voice taking on a firmer edge that viewers had rarely heard from the typically soft-spoken director. Joy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but you seem determined to paint me as some kind of villain for making films that bring people together. That's not privilege talking, that's experience. Joy's eyes lit up at the pushback, like a predator sensing wounded prey. Experience? You mean the experience of growing up as a white male in Hollywood? The experience of never having to fight for a seat at the table because it was handed to you on a silver platter? I started working when I was 6 years old, Ron replied, his composure still intact but clearly strained. I've been in this industry for over 50 years, and I've seen it change dramatically. I've hired more diverse crews and told more inclusive stories than most directors of my generation. Most directors of your generation, Joy repeated mockingly. Do you hear yourself? You're grading yourself on a curve, Ron. You're saying you're better than other old white men. But that's not exactly setting the bar very high. Is it? Whoopi finally tried to intervene, her voice carrying a note of warning. Joy, maybe we should talk about the actual film. No. I think this conversation is overdue. Joy shot back without taking her eyes off Ron. Hollywood loves to pat itself on the back for making tiny improvements while ignoring the systemic problems. Ron Howard is the poster child for that kind of thinking. Ron's knuckles were white now as he gripped his chair. What exactly would you like me to say, Joy? That I'm sorry for having a successful career? That I should apologize for telling stories that audiences connect with? I'd like you to acknowledge reality, Joy fired back. I'd like you to admit that your success came at the expense of countless talented people who never got a chance because they didn't look like you or have the connections you had. That's incredibly unfair, Ron said, his voice rising for the first time. I've worked hard every day of my life. I've treated everyone with respect, and I've tried to use my platform to tell meaningful stories. Joy laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the studio like a knife. Worked hard? You went from child actor to successful director without ever having to prove yourself the way a woman or a person of color would have had to. You think that's hard work? The other hosts sat frozen, watching their colleagues systematically tear apart one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, while Sunny Hostin stared at her notes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the interview had taken. I proved myself every single day, Ron said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Every movie I made had to succeed on its own merits. Nobody handed me anything after I turned 18 and aged out of child actor roles. Right, Joy said with obvious sarcasm. Because Hollywood is so fair and merit-based. Tell me, Ron, how many female directors did you recommend for jobs over the years? How many people of color did you mentor? I've mentored dozens of young filmmakers, Ron replied, but Joy cut him off before he could continue. How many? Give me numbers. Give me names. Because if you're going to claim you're not part of the problem, you better have some evidence to back that up. Ron stared at her for a moment, his face flushing red. I don't have to justify my entire career to you, Joy. This is supposed to be an interview about my new film, not a trial. Everything is a trial when you've benefited from an unfair system. Joy snapped. You don't get to just show up here, promote your feel-good movie, and pretend like the industry that made you rich hasn't been excluding people for decades. I never pretended anything, Ron said, his voice now clearly strained. But I also refuse to apologize for working hard and being successful. If you have a problem with the industry, take it up with the industry, not with individual artists trying to tell stories. Joy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more dangerous tone. You are the industry, Ron. You and people like you are the gatekeepers who decide what stories get told and who gets to tell them. When you make a movie about small-town America, whose small-town America are you talking about? I'm talking about universal human experiences, Ron replied. But he was beginning to sound defensive, despite his efforts to maintain composure. Universal, Joy repeated. That's another code word, isn't it? Universal means whatever white people can relate to. Because if it was truly universal, it would include everybody's experience. Not just the sanitized version that makes suburban audiences feel comfortable. Ron shook his head, clearly frustrated. You're twisting everything I say. I've made films about gay mathematicians, black jazz musicians, and working-class heroes. How is that sanitized or exclusive? You made films about those people for white audiences. Joy shot back. There's a difference between representation and exploitation. When you tell someone else's story, who profits? Who gets to decide how that story is told? The studio audience was completely silent now, caught between fascination and horror at watching one of America's nicest celebrities get verbally eviscerated on live television. Ron Howard, the man who had never been involved in a public scandal, who had maintained a spotless reputation for 5 decades, was being painted as a symbol of everything wrong with Hollywood. I profit because I'm the director, Ron said, his patience finally starting to crack. But so do the actors, the crew members, and everyone else involved in making the film. That's how the business works. The business, Joy said with disgust. Always comes back to business, doesn't it? Not art, not social responsibility. Just business. Making money off other people's stories while patting yourself on the back for being inclusive. Ron's face was now clearly red, his legendary composure hanging by a thread. Joy, I don't know what you want from me. Should I stop making movies? Should I give away all my money? What would satisfy you? I want honesty, Joy replied, her voice rising to match his. I want you to admit that your entire career has been built on a system that prioritizes people who look like you over everyone else. I want you to stop pretending that making feel-good movies is some kind of public service. My movies have entertained millions of people and provided jobs for thousands, Ron said, his voice shaking slightly with anger. If that's not a public service, then I don't know what is. Joy slammed her hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. Entertainment isn't enough anymore. Ron. Not when people are dying, not when democracy is under attack, not when basic human rights are being stripped away. Your comfort food movies are part of the problem because they let people ignore what's really happening. The other hosts finally realized the interview had gone completely off the rails. Whoopi tried once more to regain control. Joy. I think we need to take a breath here. No, Joy said, her eyes still locked on Ron Howard's increasingly angry face. I want to hear him defend making movies that tell people everything is going to be okay, when everything is clearly not okay. Ron Howard stood up abruptly from his chair, the sudden movement causing a shocked gasp from the studio audience. His face was flushed red, his hands trembling slightly, with barely contained rage. For the first time in his 50-year career, America's sweetheart director had reached his absolute breaking point. You know what, Joy? Ron said, his voice shaking with anger but still maintaining that distinctive cadence viewers had known since his Mayberry days. I came here to talk about a film that celebrates the best in people. And instead, I've been subjected to 20 minutes of character assassination from someone who clearly has her own agenda. Joy's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, sensing she had finally cracked the famously unflappable director. Oh. Now? I have an agenda? What's my agenda, Ron? Holding privileged white men accountable for their actions? Your agenda, Ron replied, pointing directly at her, is tearing people down to make yourself feel important. You're not interested in accountability or social justice. You're interested in being the smartest person in the room, even if it means destroying someone's reputation in the process. The other hosts sat in stunned silence. Whoopi's mouth hung slightly open, while Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. This wasn't political discourse anymore. This was personal warfare being broadcast to millions of homes across America. Destroying your reputation? Joy laughed harshly. Your reputation was built on a lie, Ron. The lie that talent alone got you where you are, that the system is fair, that if people just work hard enough, they'll succeed. You're the poster child for white mediocrity being rewarded. Ron's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his face were visible. White mediocrity? I've won Academy Awards. My films have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. I've employed thousands of people and told stories that have touched millions of lives. If that's mediocrity to you, then your standards are so impossibly high that nobody could ever meet them. Those awards were given to you by other white men. Joy shot back, standing up to match his energy. Those billions of dollars came from an audience conditioned to see people like you as the default. You think that makes you special? Ron took a step toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. What makes me special is that I've dedicated my entire life to this craft. I've treated everyone I've worked with respect and dignity. I've never had a scandal, never mistreated an employee, never used my position to hurt anyone. But apparently, that doesn't matter to you because I was born with the wrong skin color. There it is, Joy said triumphantly, clapping her hands together. The white victim card. Poor Ron Howard, being held accountable for his privilege. How terrible that must be for you. This isn't about privilege. Ron exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. This is about you being a bitter, angry person who gets her kicks from tearing down successful people. You couldn't make it as a comedian, so now you make a living destroying others. The audience collectively gasped. Joy's face went white, then red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ron Howard, The man who had never said an unkind word about anyone in public had just delivered a devastating personal blow on live television. "How dare you?" Joy whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare I what?" Ron replied, his voice now calm but ice-cold. "Tell the truth? You dish it out for a living, Joy. But apparently, you can't take it. You want to talk about failed careers? Let's talk about yours. You were a mediocre stand-up comic who found a new career in professional outrage." Whoopi finally found her voice. "Ron, maybe we should all take a step back here." "No, Whoopi," Ron said, never taking his eyes off Joy. "I'm done taking steps back. I'm done being polite while people like her use their platforms to spread poison. You want to know what's wrong with America? It's not successful people telling stories. It's people like Joy who think tearing others down is the same as building others up." Joy's hands were shaking now, her carefully constructed persona cracking under the unexpected counterattack. "You don't know anything about me or what I've accomplished. I know you've spent the last half hour trying to destroy a man's reputation for no reason other than the fact that you disagree with his success," Ron replied. "I know you've turned what should have been a pleasant conversation about art and storytelling into a vicious personal attack. And I know that millions of people watching at home just saw the real Joy Behar, and it's not pretty." Sarah Haynes tried desperately to salvage the situation. "Maybe we could talk about the actual film now?" "There's no point," Ron said, turning toward the edge of the stage. "This was never about the film. This was about Joy's need to prove she's morally superior to everyone else. Well, congratulations, Joy. You've proven that you're willing to ambush a guest who came here in good faith. I hope it was worth it." Joy's voice cracked slightly as she called after him. "That's right. Run away. That's what privileged people do when they're confronted with reality." Ron stopped dead in his tracks, slowly turning around to face her one final time. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras whirring as they captured every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. "Reality?" Ron said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "The reality is that I've spent 50 years earning respect in this industry, through hard work and treating people well. The reality is that you've spent your career surviving by being cruel and calling it honesty. The reality is that after today, everyone will know which one of us is the real problem." "Get out!" Joy screamed, pointing toward the exit. "Just get out." "I was already leaving," Ron replied calmly, adjusting his jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. "Good luck explaining this to your producers." As Ron Howard walked off the set, the audience erupted in a mixture of applause and confused murmurs. Some were cheering for the director who had finally stood up to what many saw as bullying, while others were shocked by the complete breakdown of civility they had just witnessed. Joy Behar stood at the table, her chest heaving, her carefully styled hair slightly disheveled from her animated gestures. The other hosts stared at her in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to proceed. Whoopi looked toward the cameras, then at her producers in the wings, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. The cameras kept rolling as Joy tried to compose herself, smoothing down her hair and straightening her blazer. "Well," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting, "I guess some people can't handle being asked tough questions." But her words felt hollow now, echoing in a studio where the audience's energy had completely shifted. What had started as Joy's moment of triumph had turned into a public relations nightmare, and everyone in the building could feel it. Whoopi finally found the strength to address the cameras directly. "We'll be right back after this commercial break," she said, her voice strained. As the red lights on the cameras dimmed, indicating they had gone to commercial, Joy slumped back into her chair, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. She had pushed too hard, gone too far, and turned a respected director into a sympathetic figure while making herself look like the aggressor. The other hosts avoided eye contact with her as production assistants scrambled around the set, trying to figure out how to salvage the remaining segments of the show. In the wings, Producers were frantically making phone calls, already knowing that this footage would be replayed endlessly across social media and cable news. Joy Behar had gotten the confrontation she wanted, but at a cost that would follow her for the rest of her career. And somewhere in the ABC building, Ron Howard was removing his microphone, shaking hands with apologetic staff members, and walking out the door with his reputation not only intact, but somehow enhanced by his willingness to finally fight back against the toxic culture of attack journalism that had taken over daytime television. The View would continue without him, but the damage had been done, and everyone watching knew exactly who had won this brutal exchange. So what do you think? Was Ron Howard justified in finally standing up to Joy Behar's relentless attacks? Or should he have maintained his composure, no matter what? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more celebrity drama breakdowns, and let me know what other explosive TV moments you'd like me to cover next.